is not investment advice.
Rising with the crowd, power unbound, change makers lead where hope is found. Superpowers for good, shaping the fate. Investors and dreamers open the gate. Supercross stands loud, proud and true, building tomorrow for me and you.
If you're like me, you have friends, loved ones who've experienced cancer, and you may know from enduring that with them that some of the worst things that happen as a result of cancer are not from the cancer, but from the treatments. Our guest today is developing a solution to one of those chronic post-cancer problems that you want to avoid. If you ever get cancer, you want your loved ones to avoid if they get it. So stick around. You do not want to miss 1 minute of this episode. Now, welcome to the Super Crowd Presents Superpowers for Good. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe. I do want to invite you, before we get started, to join us for Supercrowd 26, August 25th through 27th. Visit supercrowd26.com to learn more about this great event, but it is really going to be a lot of fun. And we're going to have some amazing content. We'll have live pitches, and we'll have amazing speakers, and we'll be introducing the Purpose-Built 100, the 100 fastest growing impact businesses in America. This is something you do not want to miss. It's going to be phenomenal. Now, help me welcome our guest today. Our guest is Carole Spangler Vaughn, Dr. Carole Spangler Vaughn. She's the CEO and founder of Eisana Health. Carole, thank you so much for joining us. We're just thrilled to have you and love the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here, Devin.
I really want to congratulate you, too, on the progress you're making. I want to just talk a little bit about your career and your experience. You are no messing around, like the real deal. Johns Hopkins PhD, MBA on top of that, because you were bored looking for things to do as a PhD. I mean, what kind of wicked smart human being does that? And then you have worked for large companies, for entrepreneurial ones. Now you've started your own. Walk us through, how did we get to this place?
Yeah, well, it's a really interesting story. So, like you said, I have a PhD in biophysics from Johns Hopkins, and I was in the lab doing research and really wanted to change and pivot and do business development. And with that strong science degree from Johns Hopkins, I wasn't really offered many opportunities. So I had to go back and get my MBA for people to understand that I could actually speak in complete sentences. So once I had my MBA, then I started doing business development, and mostly for companies doing innovative oncology solutions. And so that was my background. I've spent decades doing that. And then one day I became a cancer patient. And surprisingly, all my background, my education, and my experiences didn't prepare me for the patient experience. I was pretty devastated when I got that diagnosis. So that took me to realizing all the side effects from cancer treatment, which then took me to figuring out, well, if we're stuck with these standard of care treatments that cause these side effects, maybe we can figure out creative ways to get rid of the side effects. And so that's what caused me to found Eisana Health.
I love it. You know, the reality is that, you know, as we were saying, as I said kind of at the top of the show, some of the outcomes of cancer that are most bothersome, apart from maybe surviving, right? Surviving's good, but some of those permanent things that happen are a result of the treatment, right? Not a result of the cancer. And that's true with what you're doing at Eisana Health. Now, when you had cancer, did you experience that nerve damage? How are your fingers and toes today? If you did,
So
what's
yeah, so interesting story there too as well. So when I found out I had cancer and I needed chemotherapy, it was actually my sister-in-law that came to me and said, "Hey, I've heard this thing called scalp cooling. You can cool your head and save your hair during chemotherapy." Well, I had never heard about that. And I looked into it and it just made sense to me that if you cool your head, you constrict those blood vessels and it makes it hard for that chemo to get up to your hair follicles. So once I decided I was going to do that, I continued to do some research and something I had never ever heard of before, which is shocking given all the years I spent in oncology, but was the peripheral neuropathy, the permanent nerve damage in your hands and feet that chemo drugs can cause. So, and especially if I say chemotherapy, you're going to think about hair loss and nausea and vomiting. But this is a side effect that isn't talked about much. And I think that's because you can't see it. If I have nerve pain, you can't see that I have nerve pain unless I tell you. And the other reason I think it's not talked about is there's no cure for it. So there's no help for patients who end up with this. So I found out about the side effect. I did not want to have this particular side effect and learned that cooling, just like you can cool your scalp to save your hair, cooling your hands and feet can protect those nerves and protect you from getting the nerve damage. So as a medical innovator, I figured there'd be an easy way for me to do that, but I learned very quickly there's no solution for cancer patients. And I used baggies of frozen corn to keep my hands and feet cold, which is not a great solution because as a cancer patient, you need to cool for 6 hours. And ideally, to get the best results, you have to do it without stopping. So I can tell you I did my best with the corn, but I would take my hands out and dry them off and use my phone. But I think I did enough cooling because I didn't end up with the peripheral neuropathy. So I was really, really fortunate.
I'm glad that you survived that without that permanent damage. 'Cause I can only imagine how frustrating that is. You use your hands all the time to be in constant pain. Ah, I just can't imagine.
Well,
My
it's
mother
interesting
did.
too because we hear stories, and there was one story a friend of mine who had been a foot surgeon, and after she got done with chemotherapy, she could no longer safely operate. She couldn't use her hands anymore, so she had to give up a career that she loved. And another story about a friend of mine who was getting chemotherapy for prostate cancer, and the nerve pain got so bad, and he knew that there was no cure, that he said, "Stop the chemo. I cannot live like this." And then he died from prostate cancer. So these are the stories that keep us going. These stories did not have to end that way. We could prevent the nerve damage, which would have, in one case, saved that person, and in the other case, saved the woman's career.
That is amazing, and it's just so important. I think about my late mother who had nerve damage as a result of diabetes, not cancer treatment, and it made her she was miserable for a lot of reasons in her late years, but that was the miserablest, was the nerve damage she had. So I'm really excited to see you addressing this in a little different context, but this feels very personal and relevant to me.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the factors in my decision to invest in your deals. I am an investor in Eisana Health proudly, and so we're excited to encourage people to check this out. Tell us a little bit about your decision to raise from the crowd on Wefunder.
Yeah, raising money now is very challenging given the economic environment, and investors like to de-risk and they want to see companies generating revenue. So for those of us who are still in development stage, we're pre-revenue, it's a really hard time now to go out and find investors to invest. So we decided to do something different and try crowdfunding, knowing that cancer is something that pretty much every person has either been touched by it personally or has a loved one that's been touched by it. So it's a pretty big problem that people are invested in. They're emotional about it. And those who have gone through chemotherapy and gotten the peripheral neuropathy really are very motivated to anything they can to prevent that for future patients. So sort of the wanting to try a different way to raise funds and having a product that resonates with most people is what had us go ahead and try crowdfunding.
Yeah. This is an exciting thing that ordinary people get the opportunity to participate in this, and this is one where that personal connection makes such perfect sense because cancer is so prevalent. Everyone knows people who have had cancer. A sixth of us have had cancer. uh, I'm fortunate not to be in that group, but you're in that group. uh,
Yes.
right, of people who've had cancer. You talked about that. Um, the good news is you've got a plan to get to revenue. Tell us about your plan to get to revenue. You're not messing around. This is not, and I think you've got a path to revenue that, because of the way this treatment operates, you can get to revenue before you get to like FDA approval. This is something you can sell without it. Walk us through how that works. This is kind of an exciting business opportunity that takes out one of those huge risk factors that we all get nervous about when we're investing.
Yeah, we're very fortunate. If you can imagine, so our device cools the hands and the feet. And there's a lot of differences about it. You know, if you think about, well, gosh, I could go home and put a bag of ice on my hands or a bag of ice on my feet. That doesn't really help a cancer patient because a cancer patient, number one, doesn't need to be ice cold, so they don't need to risk frostbite, but they need to cool for like 6 hours without stopping. So, kind of the combination of less than ice cold and being able to cool for 6 to 8 hours. Well, what else does that mean? That means you need to use your hands and your feet because you're not just going to sit there and do nothing for 6 hours. So we have cooling gloves that have conductive fingertips that allow a patient to use their phone, eat, drink. You can type on a keyboard if you want to. And then we have cooling booties that are designed more like shoes that you can safely walk around. Like if you need to get up and go to the bathroom or go from the clinic to your car, from the car to your home, you can do that safely. So we're a low risk device in that we're not freezing. You can't get frostbite from our device. And because we're low risk, we can launch as a 510K exempt, which is FDA language for we don't need to wait for FDA approval or clearance in this case, as it's a medical device. So we can go ahead and just simply register with the FDA, tell them our intent. Of course, we are following all the rules that the FDA wants us to do so that we are compliant on that side. And we do have an interesting path to market. We're doing a phased launch and we're sort of scaling at each step. So we'll start with a local launch around the company. We are headquartered in the Woodlands, Texas. And so we will start, which is in the Houston area. So we'll start by launching in the Houston area, which Houston is the home of the largest medical center in the world. So we have lots of opportunities to help patients here in Houston. And then our second phase is a statewide launch in the state of Texas. And then our third phase is a national phase. So I'll kind of add another complexity to that. We do know that ultimately we want to get that FDA approval so that we can get reimbursement. So to get the reimbursement, we're going to need to run a clinical study. So all along, while we're generating revenue and launching our product at the different phases, we'll also be running a clinical study so that we can get to reimbursement, which will just broaden our market access all the more.
This is so exciting to think about because the economic opportunity that's really unusual, right? Because you have this 510K exempt pathway to proceed without FDA approvals, and you've got the opportunity then to really scale the business when you do have that. Uh, and of course, the U.S. isn't the limit of the market. Right? There are opportunities globally, right, for
That's
for this
true. That's
treatment.
true. And I'll just point out as an example I mentioned the scalp cooling earlier. That started in Europe in the 1970s. So Europe is
Wow.
well ahead of us on using cooling to prevent side effects from cancer treatment. So that's
Yeah.
one great example of a prime market.
Yeah, this is exciting stuff. Listen, I do want to remind everyone here as we kind of get ready to take a little break. We've got to just take a break, but I want to encourage everyone to check out Eisana on Wefunder. Visit s4g.biz/Eisana EISANA, or just scan the QR code on the screen there, and you can check out the offering. Again, I invested. Why did I invest? Carole's story is great. That's the first thing I always look for, right? Is there an impact story? Does it make sense? Is there a business there? Then I look at things like, what about the deal terms? Is this fair to everyone involved, right? And Carole has behaved like a grown up. And so she has put together an offering that makes sense, that is fair to investors. So this is really, I think, a great deal for investors. Check it out. Obviously, I can't give you financial advice. I don't know your situation, but I encourage you to check it out. Uh, Carole, we got to take a quick break. Forgive me. Uh, Folks, I'm here with Carole Spangler Vaughn. She's the CEO and founder of Eisana Health, an amazing company that's dealing with the neuropathy, the nerve damage that comes from chemotherapy when you're getting cancer treatments. Again, I encourage you to check it out. We're going to take a pause. When we come back, we'll talk to Carole about her superpower. So stick around. You don't want to miss this. The future is built on purpose. Join us for SuperCrowd 26 featuring Purpose Built 100. 3 days of capital, credibility, and the 100 fastest growing purpose-driven companies in America. Choose your level. Founder Circle $100 gets you premium networking plus this hardcover book. Executive access $50 with premium networking. Or register free to watch all 27 hours live. Register now at supercrowd26.com. Welcome back, everyone. I am so proud to have with us today Carole Spangler Vaughn. She's the CEO and founder of Eisana Health, a great company making a real difference in the world going forward for cancer patients. This is exciting stuff. We're going to shift gears now to talk to her about her superpower, so stick around. Carole, love what you're doing. Really impressed by your story. What is your superpower?
So I have to say my superpower is communication. So as sort of the bit of the story that I told was how that I had a PhD in biophysics from Johns Hopkins, and nobody would take me seriously to do a business development role until I got my MBA. But they were incorrect in making that assumption, because I've always had the ability to communicate even the most complex problems and complex situations in a way that anybody can understand. So that has served me well. This company is not as complex, but I've worked on all kinds of very complicated products that have really benefited by my ability to communicate like a normal person.
That is fantastic. And it's hard to think of skills that are more valuable, really, than being able to communicate well. I congratulate you. I wonder, Carole, if you can think of a specific story when your communication skill was maybe the linchpin piece of having an outcome that was important to you, where being able to communicate, whether it was in person, in writing, or whatever, can you think of a specific instance that you can share as a story when you were able to communicate effectively and you were proud of the outcome?
Yeah, I have lots of stories, but I'll pick kind of a fun story, something a little bit off topic. When we lived in Hawaii for 3 years, my husband was in the Coast Guard, And I had a franchise where we were doing stem cell therapy for pets, for animals, mostly dogs. So we would take fat out of the animal and we'd process that fat right in the lab to pull out the stem cells and then inject those stem cells mostly back into arthritic joints to regrow the cartilage. And I can tell you the science behind all that is really very complicated, but I had to be able to talk to pet owners to say, hey, your pet that you're just about to put down because they're in so much pain, we can solve that problem. We can give them more quality of life and longer years with you. And then also educate the veterinarians. So it was fun. We helped a lot of animals out there, mainly because I was able to really communicate to the pet owners.
That is so cool. And now I want to talk about why we're not doing that for humans. Speaking as someone with a bad hip. Uh, now, I will put that aside. I'm going to be a grown up and stick with the program here. Carole, we all want to communicate better. And I realize that becoming a good communicator requires some innate ability and some definite patterns of development, whether that's deliberate or accidental or just passion. It takes practice. You've accomplished some of those things. I wonder if you could coach us on how we can enhance our own ability to communicate. What are some tips that would help us be a little more like Carole Spangler Vaughn?
I think, two words come to mind. One is humility and one is confidence. Especially having a PhD from Johns Hopkins. If I were insecure and wanted to try to impress you, I could start using big words and, just kind of blow you away. But that's not going to help the conversation. So some of that is just humility, to not think too much of yourself and to really speak regular language so that you can communicate effectively with everybody.
I think that's an interesting point because when you think about communicating, uh, and you're talking about humility and confidence, that's a really interesting combination. We sometimes think of those as contradictory, and you're saying to be effective at communication, you need both. Let me see if I
Yeah,
can.
because if you're not
Go ahead.
confident, if you're not confident in yourself, you may have, one way people handle that is by putting others down, right? To try to bolster themselves up. And one way you could do that is by communicating over the top of people's heads, which just really doesn't get you anywhere. So that's why
Yeah,
confidence in yourself and then humility to not stand up on any kind of pillar.
yeah. I'm reminded of a story uh, that I will share to illustrate your point. But when I was living in Argentina, I heard about a guy that was well educated, very well educated, giving a speech in Spanish in Argentina, and he was talking about William Shakespeare. He was an expert on Shakespeare, and he pronounced Shakespeare's name the way it's common folk in Argentina would pronounce his name, um, which is to say, not correct. And not the way William Shakespeare would have said it. And people laughed at it because this was a pretty erudite audience. So he gave the rest of his speech in English, which of course many of them couldn't understand. Because they laughed at him for trying to be accessible. But I think that story oddly highlights what you're talking about, right? The willingness to speak to the level of the person you're speaking to is um, is essential, and it requires an element of humility, right? Stepping back from yourself, and that requires, at some level, the confidence to say, "Hey, I'm okay. I don't need to show off.
Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
okay." Right? That's
Yes.
I never quite thought about it like that. I'm fascinated by that. Carole, our time is up. Remind people how they can learn more and connect with you.
Yes, they can connect to me with email, Carole, Carole, at isanahealth.com, or on the screen there is a link to our Wefunder page, or you can use the QR code in the bottom corner.
Fantastic. I do want to remind everyone, I invested. I love this deal. I think the world of Carole. I think the world of, not only the story she's telling beautifully, because she's a great communicator, and not only the business prospects. A lot of businesses can be successful, but I don't invest in them because the deal terms aren't right. This is one where we have the whole package. I encourage you to check it out. It's a really intriguing deal. Oh, and we should have mentioned, Carole won the Super Crowd Award at the live pitch a few weeks back on June 3rd. So again, Carole, congratulations. Our time is up. Thank you very much for being with us.